What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over setting up the settings or options menu in our game. So we have a few different things we can do with this. We can either have this settings menu on the main menu like we have here. We'll also be able to access it in the future from the pause menu and potentially from other places, even depending on where we're at, what mode we're in, and things like that. Today we're only going to be setting up putting it into our main menu and basically what kind of settings we're going to want to be able to change. We're not going to really change anything today. That'll be all covered in another episode, in the next episode for the settings menu. This is because the settings menu is going to be comprised of actually a bit more episodes than a lot of the other menus were at first. We're going to do a little bit more complicated things with it, specifically to show you some examples of what we can do with our player controllers, as well as actually change things in the game and save these out. So we're going to have to get into saving and loading too to save the settings for these things. So there's a lot of things we can do. Long story short, we're just going to be setting this up today, adding it to the main menu, being able to click the back button to go back, and that's about it. The actual logic of this menu will come in the next episode. So, to get started, if you want to get caught up to the series, this is episode 128 of the fighting game tutorial. We've done a lot so far. It's coming together really well. I'm very excited about it, but there's also a ton more that we're going to be doing. So if you'd like to get caught up and check out everything we've done to this point, I'll leave the playlist right here in the top right corner to the entire fighting game playlist. Alternatively, if you just want to get caught up on some of our menu logic so you can get the idea of how our menu flow works, I'll link to you the first episode of the main menu, where we tied all of our menu elements together for the first time. And with that said, let's get started. So first things first, I actually want to add a few additional variables. We won't be really using them today. We'll just be setting them up and initializing them, but we won't actually be changing anything based on their values yet. So we have to start thinking about what we want in our settings menu. Now, I put these variables in my base game instance. This is because the base game instance goes across all levels, basically, as the name states, and across your entire instance of your game. So as you change things, it can change and remain despite what's being loaded in, or if things are being spawned or despawned. And so the base game instance is really good for settings. This is where you could also store details about player profiles if it's local and not stored in some sort of multiplayer network or in some server somewhere. So anytime I want to change settings that I want to load for my personal profile, I can store them here in the game instance. We've used the game instance plenty throughout the series, so I'm not going to go over everything that we've added and everything that we have in here because there is quite a bit. But there's two things I'm going to add, and then I'm going to take note of a few other things in here that I think are important. So first of all, I've added a sound effect volume and a music volume. So the game instance has these values, and when we change them, whether it be in the main menu options or in the settings on the pause menu, we want to adjust the volume of the sound effects of the music and probably have a master volume as well. And so changing this value here will basically be a multiplier. If we have the sound effect volume or the music volume at 0.5 or halfway through the slider bar, we're going to have them at 50% of their standard volume. Now, you'll notice I put these in the category game instance settings. This is just the name I have for it. It's not something you have to do. But all these things I have as game instance settings are things that I'm going to allow the players to set. This we were manually setting, the is device for multiple players, but this is essentially our keyboard mode. I'm going to also use this as a setting now, so I'm going to change it from controller to game instance settings. So these five are what we are going to start with for the options and settings menu and being able to change them in the future. So we have our sound effect volume, our music volume, our round time. So in modes where the time can be changed, maybe not story mode, maybe not arcade mode, maybe not online, but in like a local versus setting or player versus AI setting, we could change our round time to a different amount of seconds, not just 99 seconds. And we can also change our number of rounds. So some fights might only be 1, they could be 2, they could be 3, they could be 5, whatever we want to allow the players to choose. And like I said, enabling and disabling of keyboard mode. I'm going to do logic to allow this to be found, when we are on our side selection screen most likely, but potentially even before that, our devices that we have access to are going to be automatically determined. And thus, we don't have to actually go through and set if it's keyboard mode or not, but I'm going to allow this to be in a setting for us as developers, so while we're making the game, we can turn this on and off to play around with it and test it. Now this stuff's all well and good, and usually I allow these values to default to just whatever their default is without even doing a constructor. We never set up a constructor in our base game instance yet. However, with some of these settings, we do want to set a default value, not just 0, not just true or false. So I'm going to actually make the constructor for the base game instance yet. It's kind of funny that we haven't done it yet, since we have for pretty much every other class, but we just haven't needed to. Let's go ahead and just rectify that and make this work anyway. So if you go into your base game instance.cpp, you can see I have a constructor here. Now before, this file was basically line 1 and 2. It only had a comment and the include. If you look at the .h file, you can see that I've had to create the constructor here above all my variables. So I'd recommend doing this now so that you can set these default values. Alternatively, if you make a blueprint of this game instance, blueprint child, then you can set the default values in there, kind of like we do with our command list on our characters. So it's up to you if you'd like to do it this way. I'd recommend this way just so that everything is consistent. So it's pretty simple. We just want to have our constructor here. Literally, you're going to put the name of your class with the letter U in front of it. U base game instance. And then we are going to go into the CPP and we're going to fill out the constructor. So all I do in here is set the default values for the variables that we've set up. And we've created the sound effect and music volume. I'm going to default them at 1.0. They are floats and that's going to be a ratio. But 1.0 is basically 100%. So we're going to default the sound effects and the music to 100% of their standard volume. Then I'm defaulting the number of rounds to 3 and the round time to 99 in modes where they can be altered based on the game instance values. And then I'm going to set is device for multiple players to be false by default. In this case, I actually use keyboard more than I use controller, so you might want to default it to true, but it doesn't matter. Like I said, we're going to be going over the settings menu and actually having it do things. Today I'm just setting everything up in a nice quick episode, that way, and then in the next episode we can just jump into how to make all these things work and how we can save out, profiles, settings, profiles, those sort of things. So you can set it to true or false, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you use more is probably the better option to set it to. Once that's done, you don't have to do anything else in your base game instance. So you can go ahead and open up your editor. And we're going to make a new menu. So I'm going to go to my Blueprints Widgets Menus folder. And I'm going to make a new user interface widget blueprint. I've called mine the settings screen. You can call it whatever you want. Options menu, settings menu, whatever. And I'm going to show you what this looks like for me. So what I've done here is pretty simple. We're going to make this a little bit more complex in the future so we can add like a scroll box here in case we have more options than what can fit on the screen. But for what it's worth now, this is all we care about. So we have our standard canvas panel that's in here. I've added a background image that I've anchored to the full size of the widget with no offsets, and I've changed the brush tint to be black. So I've given it a black background. Other than that, all I've done is I've added my options as I want to use them. So basically, I've kind of chunked everything out. If I think it's going to be useful together and not separate, meaning like the music volume should have a slider with it. Sound effect volume should have a slider. Round time should have options. The number of rounds should have options. And then the keyboard mode should have an enabled or disabled. So you can see 3 different types here, really, of settings that you can choose. And all of them should kind of be paired together with the title and the possible choices that the player can make. So I've added the literal text widget for all of my titles. So for my settings title alone, I've added a text widget. And then I've made all these canvases, literally, you type canvas panel and just drag it onto the screen. What I did is I made the first one and copied the rest and just went with it. So I'm going to add another canvas panel under it, and I've called them names that will make sense when I'm looking at them later, and also if I have to look at them in the blueprint graph. So I've made a music volume, sound effect volume, round time, number of rounds, and keyboard mode canvas. That way I can basically keep the title and the content together. Within the canvas of each, I have the text, which is literal text, with the text I want to display. And then in this case, I've actually set up a slider for the music volume and sound effect volume. We will be going over sliders. We're going to actually skip them today because they're their own thing, but I did want to put them in here since this is what we'll be using. Sliders, for the record, are just literally this slider here. I haven't changed anything about it other than position, size, all that good stuff. But that can be customized later anyway. Sometimes the slider won't display properly in the widget view. So you can see you don't see the line here. That's just a bug. This is also a regular slider. Don't worry about that. Okay, now I have a round time canvas. And what I put in here is the round time text. And I put verses in parentheses because I want this to be known that probably story mode, arcade mode, and online aren't going to be affected by that. Practice mode will have its own stuff as well. It doesn't really need these round time settings. So this is really for local versus, or maybe even AI versus AI in the future. And what I've done is I've added a button for each of these. So I don't really have to go through all these because after the first one you should know what they're all going to be about. But I'll show you everything just in case you want to copy this directly. So essentially I've added a button into the canvas panel, which I've called like round time 1 button. So this is basically my first option. For the style, I've actually assigned my standard button that I have for all my other menus. Nothing special there. And then all of them have a text. So the buttons have a text child. And then that text is the number that we're going to end up setting it to. So in the next episode, when we click on the round time versus, say we select 30 as our option, then the round time will go to 30 seconds for the versus matches. Then you can pretty much guess what's going to happen from here. So all of our options in the round time menu are going to be related to the 5 that we talked about. So like I said, we have our 30 here. We have 60 on this one. We have 90 on this one. 99 on this one, and then infinite on this one, which, by the way, if you want this, all I did was type in infinite symbol on Google and paste it in there. And that's all I have in here. So I have 5 buttons in that piece of text. You can pretty much guess how the next one's going to go from there because essentially it's a direct copy, but with the values changed. So now we have the number of rounds that are going to be in each versus match. We have a button for each of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You could also have higher values. Again, that's up to you. And every button has a text child, which has the number on there, just like the round timer had. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Lastly, I have the keyboard mode option, or all players on one device, and it has enabled or disabled, so it's actually a toggle. You could have just one button and not 2. Which I'll show you how to do that in the next episode when we go over a little bit more of that logic. But essentially, we want to know if we have this mode enabled or disabled. So right now I have 2 buttons. I have one here, which has the enabled text on it. Same as the ones above, just with actual text and not numbers. Then I have the disabled button, which has the disabled text on it. So all these are pretty simple in design. Nothing too complicated here. They're just kind of separated to look a little bit different and look a little bit more unique depending on the option that we're choosing. Lastly, I have a back button here, which works like all the other back buttons in our game, so I don't have to go over this too much. But essentially, I put in a button with a text child that says back, and then I filled out the onPressed event right here in the graph. You can see this is the only thing currently in the graph. And basically, I'm removing this widget from the parent if that button is pressed. So we are going to spawn the settings menu when we press the settings button. When the back button is pressed, we're just going to remove it from the parent. Whether we're on the main menu or doing this from the pause menu, this logic can stay and be the same for either, because either way we want to get rid of the menu at this point. We may want to save changes to the profile and things like that, but again, that'll be covered in the next episode when we actually get into saving this data. All right, and now all we have to do is actually add the settings menu to the screen when we press the settings button, and then we can test it out and we'll be good to go. So basically, if you go to your main menu screen, I've added a new button now that wasn't here before, which is called Settings. You could also add a cogwheel like a lot of games do, or some other image to track it. So button, text, again, nothing super special here. But what we want to do is make sure that when we press it, or when we have our default custom functionality in here, that we open up the settings menu and make sure we stop listening to inputs on the main menu, and or block it out using the player controller in the next episode. So if we go into the graph, we're going to have to change any of the logic that was reliant on the individual indices, because I did put them above the quit button, but you could put it wherever you want. Just make sure it lines up with your logic. So for me, all I had to do, putting it above the quit button, is I essentially had to change what my selections did. And what I mean by that is if I go into each of my functions here, so I have move selection border, we have the switch statement toward the beginning, which determines what button we're on, and that knows what button has to be highlighted and hovered. That way it can indicate to the player what action they're currently on, what they're going to do if they press the confirm button. So all I did is on the switch for index 4, which is the 5th button, which again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so the settings button. Instead of going to the quit option, it actually goes here now, which takes the settings button, sets it to the hovered variant, and then clears the other selections. We didn't have 6 buttons before, so I added another pin to the switch statement. This is index 5. You can see this goes above everything else. And this very simply just does the same logic that the quit button did in the past. So quite literally, you can actually copy the quit button logic, paste it over here, and just put in the settings button logic for index 4, just like I did here. Okay, so that's the visual component. Now let's go into the clear pass selections component. So when we're trying to get rid of the hover component, when they swap off of that button, this is also the same as our other buttons. So before we had this current P1 selection not equal to this index, and if it's not, we're going to clear it. So it doesn't really matter what that index is. From a logical standpoint, like the game doesn't care. It just knows whatever button's at that index is going to be cleared, because we have an event that clears it, which we've set up many, many episodes ago. So refresher there if you forgot. So all we have to do to add a new button here is add a custom event like that. I've called it clear selection 6 since we have the other one already. And I've taken the one that was the quit button on clear selection 5, swapped it out for the settings button, and moved it over to clear selection 6. Again, super simple. Literally copy and paste, put in the new event, and then in clear pass selections, clear selection 5 will now be clearing the settings button. So you just have to add the additional logic to clear the quit button. All we do there is like we've done for the rest of this function, and you're probably tired of hearing it by now, but we're going to take the logic after clear selection 5 and just check against the final index, which is index 5 in this case, which is now the quit button. So whether it's true or false from the previous branch, we're going to continue, make sure that current P1 selection is not on index 5, and if it's not, we're going to clear it. Plain and simple. That will get rid of all the issues with adding this new button in, so it'll now be able to be hovered, highlighted, and you'll be able to switch between that and the quit button without any issue. Quick note that if you want to actually be able to access it, we have to update our max selections because it only allows us to move between the buttons that we've given access to based on their index. We were only allowing 5 before because we had 5 buttons, so make sure you increase that value by 1 to allow for 6 buttons. And the very final thing we have to do is add the settings menu to the screen when we press the confirm button. So now we can move on top of it and it highlights and everything. When the player presses the confirm button, we need to pop up the settings menu. So if we go to the confirm selection function, after our switch statement, again, we only had 0 through 4 here. Make sure that you add a new pin and we have 0 through 5. On index 4, remember, that is our settings button. All we want to do is create the settings screen widget and add it to the viewport. So quite literally, we do create widget, search for the settings screen, and then add to viewport, like we've done here. Everything that was here before, the creating the exit game pop-up, adding it, all this stuff, that should be on the quit game button. So just move that down to the next index like I've done here. All right, and at that point, you're done. Your settings menu should pop up, and you should have access to all the options that we've set up in previous episodes. So there you go. That's all you really need. We'll go over the custom input and the actual saving of these values in the next episode. So be on the lookout for that. But otherwise, guys, if this helped you make your settings menu, please subscribe. That's more for myself on the channel than anything else you can do. It's completely free, and I really appreciate it. Also want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to reach out to me on Discord. We have a Discord community. There's a link in the description. It's completely free, and I'd be happy to help you out with any of the problems you had. Like I said, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.